I froze the moment I heard it, the sound of a child crying. My office door swung open and a small boy stumbled inside, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks, his breath coming in ragged gasps, like he'd been running for miles. I pulled my eyes away from the laptop screen and stared directly at him, my mind racing with questions. Who is this kid? How did he even get up here? This floor was strictly for executives, with security tight enough to make Fort Knox jealous. Yet here he stood in front of me, clutching his shirt with tiny fists, sobbing like his world had just shattered. Something inside me softened immediately. I've always had a weakness for kids, even when I don't understand what's happening. My name is Tyler and I'm just a junior manager here, living a life that's been pretty straightforward until now. Work, home, and a loneliness I've never really admitted to anyone, not even myself. But today felt different. Hey, what's wrong? I pushed back from my chair and took a cautious step toward him. He flinched backward, his hesitation stopping me in my tracks. But I softened my voice even more. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. What's your name? He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, then whispered. And Max. Max. A small name for a small kid, fitting perfectly. I extended my hand slowly, but he still looked uncertain. Max. How did you get here all by yourself? Where are your parents? Another tear slipped down his cheek before he answered. Daddy. Daddy left me. He was angry. He's always angry. A sharp ache pierced through my chest. This child was so young yet already carrying the weight of feeling abandoned. I wondered if maybe this was just a misunderstanding, or perhaps he'd wandered up from another floor. But hearing him speak, I felt like there was a massive void in his life. Someone who wasn't giving him the love and care he desperately needed. Max, what's your daddy's name? I can call him for you. He looked up at me, then said quietly, Carter Aldridge. My heart stopped for a full second. Carter Aldridge. The CEO. The owner of this entire company. Probably the most intimidating man I'd ever encountered. Stone-faced in every meeting. Ruthless in every decision. I never even knew he had a son, let alone one who seemed so emotionally broken. I pushed my thoughts aside and focused back on Max. Okay, Max? You stay right here with me. I'll call your daddy. Before I could even reach for my phone, the door flew open again, and this time it was the voice that could silence an entire floor. Max. Carter Aldridge himself walked in, and his presence filled the room instantly. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp jawline and eyes that usually held an intensity that made me uncomfortable. But today those eyes held something else entirely. Tension, fear, desperation. His gaze landed on Max first, then shifted to me. For just a second, his expression softened barely, like a crack forming in a thick wall. Max, what are you doing here? Carter's voice was deep, but the anger I expected wasn't there. Instead, there was worry. Max didn't move from his spot. He pressed himself against me like I was some kind of shield. I stood there awkwardly. On one side, the CEO, and on the other, his son clinging to me as if we'd known each other for years. Carter took another step forward, but Max grabbed the corner of my shirt. No, I don't want to go with you. Carter stopped. His face looked helpless for the first time since I'd known him. He turned his attention to me, and this time, his eyes were asking a question I wasn't sure I could answer. Why is he comfortable with you? I didn't respond, because honestly, I didn't know the answer myself. I glanced down at Max, who was still holding on to me, then back at Carter. There was something happening here that I couldn't quite grasp, something fragile and important. Carter wasn't just a CEO in this moment. He was a father who'd lost his way, and somehow, his son had found refuge with me, a stranger. Carter took a breath and crouched down to Max's eye level, his movements slower now, more careful. Max, please listen to me. I'm not angry anymore. I was just scared when I couldn't find you. The vulnerability in his voice caught me off guard. Carter Aldridge, the man who never showed weakness, was admitting fear in front of me, in front of his son. Max's grip on my shirt loosened slightly, but he didn't let go completely. You won't yell at me? Max's voice was so small, so fragile. I won't yell. I promise. Max finally released my shirt and took a tentative step toward his father. Carter scooped him up immediately, holding him close, and in that moment I saw a completely different side of him. A father who loved his son deeply but maybe didn't know how to show it properly. Carter looked at me again, and this time, his eyes held something I couldn't quite place. Gratitude, maybe, or something deeper. "Thank you, Tyler." 2 simple words. But the way he said my name, like he actually saw me as a person, not just an employee, sent an unexpected jolt through me. I nodded, unsure of what else to do, and watched as Carter carried Max toward the door. Just before leaving, Carter glanced back one more time, and our eyes met. There was a silent question hanging in the air between us, something unspoken but undeniably present. After they left, I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty doorway. What just happened? Why did Max run to me? Why did Carter look at me like that? My mind was spinning with questions I couldn't answer. I returned to my desk, but concentration was impossible. The image of Max's tear-streaked face kept replaying in my head, along with the unexpected softness in Carter's eyes. I tried to focus on the reports in front of me, but every few minutes my thoughts drifted back to that strange encounter. There was something about the way Max had trusted me so immediately, and the way Carter had looked at me, not as a boss to an employee but as something else. I couldn't define it, but it lingered in the air like an unfinished conversation. By the time evening rolled around, I'd accomplished almost nothing. I packed up my things and headed home, but the encounter stayed with me. As I walked to my car, I wondered if I'd ever see Max again, or if this was just a random moment that would fade into memory. Something told me, though, that this wasn't the end. Something told me that today had shifted something fundamental, even if I couldn't see it yet. When I finally got home and collapsed onto my couch, I realized I was still thinking about them, about Max's desperate need for comfort, and about Carter's unexpected vulnerability. I'd spent years working at this company, keeping my head down, doing my job, never standing out, but in one afternoon, everything had changed. A little boy had stumbled into my office, and somehow I'd become part of something I didn't fully understand yet. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Tomorrow I'd go back to work, back to being just another face in the corporate machine. But tonight, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken an unexpected turn. The next morning arrived with a strange sense of anticipation I couldn't explain. I walked into the office building like I always did, coffee in hand, mind preparing for another routine day, but something felt off. Or maybe off wasn't the right word. Different. I couldn't stop replaying yesterday's scene in my head, the way Max had clung to me, the way Carter had looked at me with those vulnerable eyes. It haunted me in a way that wasn't unpleasant, just consuming. I stepped into the elevator, nodding at a few colleagues who barely acknowledged my existence. Nothing unusual there. As the doors closed and the elevator began its ascent, I found myself wondering if Carter even remembered what happened. He probably had 1,000 things on his mind, being the CEO and all. Yesterday was likely just a blip on his radar, a minor inconvenience he'd already moved past. But for 4, it felt monumental. When I reached my floor and walked toward my office, I noticed something immediately. There, on my desk, sat a small envelope. Cream-colored paper, expensive-looking, with my name written across the front in elegant handwriting. I set my coffee down and picked it up carefully, my heart beating faster than it should for something so simple. I opened it slowly, pulling out a folded note. "Thank you for yesterday. I haven't seen Max that calm in a very long time. C.A. Carter, Aldridge." I read it 3 times, trying to process the fact that the CEO had personally written me a note. Not an email, not a company memo, a handwritten note. My fingers traced over the letters, and I noticed the slight inconsistency in the ink. Like he'd paused while writing, thinking about what to say next. This wasn't dictated to an assistant. This was personal. I tucked the note into my desk drawer and tried to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering back to those few sentences. Why did he take the time to do this? What did it mean? Was he just being polite, or was there something more beneath the surface? Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see my usual lineup of meetings, but instead found something odd. 3 of my scheduled meetings had been canceled. Just canceled. No explanation, no reschedule requests. I frowned and checked with my assistant, who seemed just as confused as I was. "I don't know, Tyler," she said, shrugging. "The cancellations came from the top floor. Executive level. The top floor. Carter's floor." A strange flutter moved through my stomach. Was he clearing my schedule? But why? I tried to push the thought away, telling myself I was reading too much into things, but the coincidence felt too deliberate to ignore. Lunchtime came and went. I ate at my desk, barely tasting the sandwich I'd grabbed from the cafeteria, my mind still circling around the morning's strange developments. By mid-afternoon, I'd managed to complete a few reports, but my productivity was shot. Every time I tried to concentrate, my thoughts drifted back to Carter, to Max, to the way everything had shifted in such a short time. Then, just as I was about to pack up for the day, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow evening. Dinner. 7 p.m. Address attached. Carter." I stared at the message, reading it over and over until the words blurred together. Dinner? With Carter Aldridge? My boss? The CEO? My mind immediately went into overdrive, spinning through possibilities. Was this a business dinner? Some kind of performance review? But then why send it from a personal number? And why phrase it so informally? Before I could overthink it further, another message appeared. "Max has been asking about you all day. He'd like to see you again." Oh, so this was about Max. That made more sense. Carter probably wanted to thank me properly. Maybe have me talk to Max to help smooth things over between them. It was a logical explanation, and I clung to it gratefully, even as a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that maybe there was more to it. I typed out a response, my fingers hovering over the keyboard as I debated what to say. "I'd be happy to see Max again. What should I bring?" The response came almost immediately. "Just yourself. That's all he needs." I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. What was I getting myself into? This wasn't normal. Junior managers didn't get personal dinner invitations from CEOs. We didn't receive handwritten notes or have our schedules mysteriously cleared. Yet here I was, somehow pulled into the orbit of Carter Aldridge and his son, with no clear understanding of how or why. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. I tried to work, tried to focus on spreadsheets and reports, but my mind was already jumping ahead to tomorrow evening. What would I wear? What would we talk about? Would it be awkward sitting across from my boss in a non-professional setting? And Max, would he be happy to see me? Or had yesterday just been a fluke, a moment of desperation that had already faded? By the time I finally left the office, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I climbed into my car and sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, trying to make sense of everything. My life had been so predictable, so routine. Wake up, work, go home, sleep, repeat. I'd convinced myself I was content with that simplicity, that I didn't need anything more. But now something was shifting, and I wasn't sure if I should be excited or terrified. Probably both. I drove home on autopilot, my thoughts consumed by tomorrow's dinner. When I finally walked into my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch, pulling out my phone to look at Carter's messages again. The address he'd sent was in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city, a place where people like me didn't usually go. Private estates, guarded entrances, the kind of wealth that felt almost fictional. I pulled up the address on a map and zoomed in, studying the area. Trees, privacy, space. Everything about it screamed different world. And tomorrow I'd be stepping into that world, not as an employee but as, what? A guest? A friend? I didn't even know what to call myself in this situation. I set my phone aside and closed my eyes, trying to calm the nervous energy buzzing through me. This was just dinner. Just a thank you for helping with Max. Nothing more, nothing less. I repeated that to myself several times, but it didn't stop my heart from racing every time I thought about seeing Carter again. Not as my boss but as a father, as a person with vulnerabilities and fears just like anyone else. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying every detail of yesterday's encounter, analyzing every word Carter had said, every look he'd given me. By the time morning light filtered through my curtains, I'd barely gotten 4 hours of rest, but I felt wide awake, adrenaline already coursing through my veins. Today was going to change something. I could feel it. The entire day felt like I was moving through water. Every hour dragging endlessly towards 7 o'clock. I went through the motions at work, answered emails, attended the one meeting that hadn't been mysteriously canceled, reviewed documents that I'd have to read twice later because nothing was actually sinking in. My mind was somewhere else entirely, already standing at Carter's front door, already wondering what the evening would bring. Colleagues passed by my office, offering brief greetings that I returned automatically. But I doubt they noticed how distracted I was. I'd always been good at fading into the background, at being present without actually being seen. But today I felt hyper-visible, like every glance in my direction carried weight, like everyone somehow knew where I was going tonight. Ridiculous. Obviously, nobody knew. Nobody cared. I was just another employee in a company of hundreds, and Carter Aldridge was just my boss doing something unexpectedly kind. That's all this was. Keep telling yourself that, Tyler. By 5 o'clock I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my things early, something I never did, and headed home to get ready. The drive felt longer than usual. Every red light an eternity. Every slow driver a personal offense. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I practically jogged to my door, already mentally rifling through my closet. What does one wear to dinner at a CEO's private estate? Business casual felt too stiff, too much like work. But going too casual seemed disrespectful. I stood in front of my closet for 15 minutes, pulling out shirts and putting them back, second-guessing every choice. Finally, I settled on something in between. Dark jeans, a clean button-up shirt, nothing too formal but put together enough to show I'd made an effort. I showered, changed, checked my reflection about 20 times, and then checked my phone. 6:15. I had 45 minutes, but the drive would only take 20. I was going to be early, which felt awkward, but sitting here waiting felt impossible. I grabbed my keys, took one last deep breath, and headed out. The drive to Carter's neighborhood was surreal. The houses grew larger and more spaced out as I went, eventually giving way to long driveways hidden behind gates and tall hedges. My GPS guided me to an imposing entrance, iron gates with subtle security cameras, a call box that looked more sophisticated than my entire apartment. I rolled down my window and pressed the button, my heart hammering. Name? A professional voice crackled through the speaker. Tyler, I'm here to see Mr. Aldridge. One moment. The gates swung open silently and I drove through, following a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured landscaping. Soft white lights illuminated the path, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. The house, no, estate came into view gradually, and I had to consciously keep my jaw from dropping. It wasn't ostentatious or gaudy, but it was undeniably impressive. Modern architecture blending with classic elegance. Large windows glowing warmly from within. I parked where the driveway widened and sat there for a moment, gathering my courage. This was really happening. I was really here. I stepped out of the car, smoothed down my shirt one more time, and walked toward the front entrance. Before I could even reach for the doorbell, the door opened. Carter stood there, and I almost didn't recognize him at first. No suit, no tie, just a simple black shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows and dark jeans that somehow made him look more approachable and more intimidating at the same time. His hair wasn't slicked back like it usually was at the office. It fell slightly forward like he'd run his hand through it recently. And his eyes, there was that warmth again, that softness I'd glimpsed yesterday. Tyler, you came. He smiled, actually smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Of course. I said I would. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Come in. Max has been watching the driveway for the past half hour. He stepped aside and I walked past him into the entrance hall. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, tasteful art on the walls, but somehow it still felt like a home rather than a museum. Warm lighting, comfortable furniture visible in the adjacent rooms, small signs of life like Max's backpack hanging on a hook near the door. Where is Max? I asked, looking around. Upstairs. He was waiting, but I think the excitement wore him out. He fell asleep about 20 minutes ago. Carter closed the door and gestured toward the living room. I didn't want to wake him. He's been having trouble sleeping lately. Oh, disappointment flickered through me. though I tried not to show it. I was looking forward to seeing him. He'll be disappointed too when he wakes up and realizes he missed you. Carter's expression held something I couldn't quite read. But I'm glad you're here anyway. I wanted to talk to you. Just us. Just us. Those two words sent an unexpected current through me. I followed him into the living room, where a fireplace crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows across comfortable-looking sofas. On the mantel, I noticed several framed photos of Max, smiling, laughing, playing, but in none of them did I see Carter. It struck me as sad. This collection of moments where the photographer was always absent, never part of the picture. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Wine?" Carter asked, and there was something almost nervous in his tone, which seemed impossible for someone like him. "Coffee would be great, thank you." He disappeared into what I assumed was the kitchen, and I took the opportunity to look around more closely. The room was meticulously clean but lived in. Max's toys were neatly organized in a corner basket. A children's book lay open on the coffee table, as if someone had been reading it recently. Small details that painted a picture of a life I'd never imagined Carter Aldridge living. Not the ruthless CEO, but a single father trying his best. He returned carrying 2 mugs, handing one to me before settling onto the opposite end of the sofa, maintaining a respectful distance. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, grateful for something to hold. "Thank you for coming," Carter said after a moment of comfortable silence. "I know this must seem strange. A little," I admitted, "but I'm glad I came. How has Max been since yesterday?" "Better. Actually. Calmer. He keeps talking about you, about the nice man in the office who wasn't scared of his tears." Carter's gaze held mine. "He doesn't trust easily. His mother left when he was very young. And I haven't always been the father he needed. Work consumed me. I thought providing for him meant giving him everything except the one thing that actually mattered, which is presence, patience, understanding." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant. "Watching you with him yesterday made me realize how much I've failed in that regard. You gave him something in 5 minutes that I've been struggling to give him for years." "You haven't failed him," I said quietly. "He loves you. I could see it. He just needs to know you're not going to disappear behind anger or work." Carter looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt exposed under that gaze. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See through everything to what actually matters. You're so genuine. Real." He set his mug down and leaned forward slightly. "Do you know how rare that is? Especially in my world, where everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something." "I don't want anything from you," I said, and I meant it. "I know. That's exactly what makes you different." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "When I'm with you, Tyler, I don't feel like the CEO. I don't feel like I have to perform or maintain an image. I just feel like myself. Like Carter. And I haven't felt that way in longer than I can remember." My heart was racing now, thundering against my rib cage. This wasn't just about Max anymore. This was something else entirely, something I hadn't prepared for. "I don't know what to say to that," I whispered. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." He held my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw vulnerability, hope, and something that looked almost like fear. "You've changed something in my life, Tyler. In Max's life. And I find myself wanting to know what else might be possible." I couldn't find the words to respond, because honestly, nothing in my life had prepared me for this moment. Carter sat close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, could sense the tension in the air between us growing thicker with each passing second. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made me feel completely transparent, like he was reading every thought, every doubt, every hidden feeling I'd been trying to suppress since the moment we met. My hand trembled slightly against the coffee mug, and I quickly set it down on the table before he could notice my nervousness betraying the calm facade I was desperately trying to maintain. I'm not sure I understand what you're trying to tell me," I finally managed, forcing my voice to remain steady even as my heart hammered against my ribcage with enough force that I worried he might actually hear it. Carter exhaled slowly and leaned back slightly, creating a bit more distance between us, as if he'd suddenly become aware of how close he'd gotten, and was now second-guessing whether he'd crossed some invisible boundary. "I apologize. I'm making you uncomfortable, aren't I?" "No, that's not it. I'm just confused. You barely know me. We've only had a handful of conversations, and most of those were about Max. But I want to know you. Every part of you." Those words, delivered with such straightforward honesty, hit me like a physical force. My breath caught in my throat, and I found myself unable to look away from his face. From the vulnerability written clearly across features that were usually so controlled and unreadable. Here I was, sitting across from Carter Aldridge, one of the most powerful men in the entire city, someone who commanded respect and sometimes fear from everyone around him, and he was telling me he wanted to know me. Why? What could he possibly see in someone like me? I was nobody special, just another employee in his massive company. Just a junior manager with a modest background and no particularly impressive accomplishments to my name. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Raw and direct and probably far too honest. Carter studied me for a long moment, his expression thoughtful, then picked up his coffee mug and took a slow sip, as if buying himself time to formulate the right response. When he spoke again, his voice had softened even further, carrying a vulnerability I'd never heard from him before, and probably never expected to hear. "'Cause you showed me something I'd forgotten existed. Watching you with Max made me realize I was losing my son, not because I didn't love him, but because I'd forgotten how to show it properly. When you made me promise not to yell at him, that was the first time in years someone held me accountable for my actions as a father. Someone expected me to be better than I was being." My throat tightened with emotion. I wanted to say something meaningful, something that would capture how profoundly his words affected me, but everything I thought of felt inadequate compared to the weight of what he'd just shared. "You're different," Carter continued, his gaze never wavering from mine. "You see me as a person, not as a CEO or a position of power or someone who can advance your career. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world?" I dropped my eyes, unable to maintain that intense eye contact any longer without feeling completely exposed. "I just do what feels right to me." Exactly. That authenticity, that genuine kindness, that's what makes you extraordinary. We talked for hours that night, the conversation flowing naturally from one topic to another as the fire crackled in the background and the world outside faded into irrelevance. Carter opened up about his past in ways I suspected he rarely did with anyone, telling me about Max's mother leaving when their son was only 2 years old, about the crushing weight of single parenthood while simultaneously running a massive company that demanded constant attention. He'd never considered remarrying, he admitted, because he'd convinced himself he was incapable of forming genuine emotional connections anymore. Work had become everything, and somewhere along the way he'd forgotten how to be anything other than the CEO. "But meeting you," he said, his eyes reflecting the dancing firelight, "made me question whether I was wrong about that. Made me wonder if maybe I'd just been waiting for the right person." I listened, absorbing every word, watching this man who'd always seemed so untouchable reveal the cracks in his carefully constructed armor. Carter Aldridge, who controlled boardrooms with a single glance and made decisions that affected thousands of people, was sitting here with me, vulnerable and honest in a way I suspected few people ever witnessed. And I didn't know what to do with that information, didn't know how to process the weight of what he was offering me. The next morning, I arrived at work to find a carefully wrapped package waiting on my desk. Inside was an elegant watch, understated but clearly expensive, with clean lines and a leather band that matched my personal aesthetic perfectly. The accompanying note was written in that same distinctive handwriting I'd seen before. "Thank you for last night. A small token of my appreciation. I hope you like it, Carter." Before I could fully process the gesture or figure out how I felt about accepting such an expensive gift, my phone rang. Carter's name flashed on the screen and I answered with trembling fingers, my heart already racing. "Hello? Do you like it?" His voice carried a hint of nervousness that seemed completely at odds with his usual supreme confidence. "It's beautiful, but you really didn't need to do this." "I know I didn't need to, but I wanted to." A brief pause, then his voice softened further. "Are you free this evening?" "Yes." "Why are you asking?" "Max has been asking about you constantly, since you left last night. And honestly, so have I. Would you be willing to come by again?" I couldn't suppress the smile that spread across my face, warm and genuine. This was becoming a pattern, these invitations to step into their world, and part of me wondered where it would ultimately lead. But another part, the part that was already growing dangerously attached to both of them, didn't care about the destination. I just wanted to keep moving forward to see where this unexpected connection might take us. I'd love to come over. When I arrived at Carter's estate that evening, I felt noticeably more at ease than during my first visit to this imposing property. The gates opened smoothly at my approach, the guards clearly having been informed of my arrival well in advance. I drove up the familiar winding driveway, admiring how the landscape lighting created an almost magical atmosphere, and realized with surprise that my previous nervousness had been replaced by a warm anticipation that made my chest feel lighter. The front door swung open before I could even reach for the bell, and suddenly Max was there, launching himself at my legs with the boundless enthusiasm only a small child can genuinely muster. "Tyler! Tyler!" He wrapped his arms around my knees in a tight hug and looked up at me with the brightest smile I'd seen yet, his whole face radiating pure joy. "Daddy said you'd definitely come. He promised." I glanced past him to see Carter standing in the doorway, hands casually tucked in his pockets, wearing an expression so relaxed and content it transformed his entire appearance from the stern CEO into someone approachable and warm. This was the first time I'd seen him look genuinely at peace, completely comfortable in his own skin, and the sight did something strange to my chest that I wasn't quite ready to analyze. "Of course I came. I promised, didn't I? Did you miss me?" "So much. Come on, I made you a special drawing. It took me all day." He grabbed my hand with sticky fingers and pulled me inside with surprising strength for someone so small, chattering excitedly about colors and shapes and all the things he'd included in his artwork. I caught Carter's eye as we passed through the entryway, noticing the complex emotion there, gratitude mixed with something protective, something almost possessive that sent an unexpected thrill through me that I tried very hard to ignore. The evening unfolded beautifully, each moment feeling more natural than the last. Max showed me his entire toy collection with detailed explanations of each item's importance, explained in elaborate detail the convoluted plots of his favorite cartoons, and insisted I help him build an impossibly tall tower out of colorful blocks. Eventually all that excitement exhausted him enough that he climbed onto the couch beside me and curled up with his head resting against my shoulder, his breathing gradually slowing as sleep claimed him. I sat perfectly still, afraid to disturb him, marveling at how quickly this little boy had worked his way into my heart. His trust felt like both a gift and a responsibility, something precious that I wanted desperately to protect. When his breathing deepened into the unmistakable rhythm of deep sleep, I carefully shifted to lay him down more comfortably on the cushions, preparing to leave and let Carter handle bedtime routines. But as I started to stand, Carter's hand caught my wrist, his grip gentle but unmistakably firm. "Wait, please don't go yet." I froze, acutely aware of the warmth of his fingers against my skin. His touch conveyed without words that he wanted me to stay. But the evening wasn't over despite Max's early surrender to exhaustion. I sank back onto the couch, hyper-aware of how close we were sitting, how Max's peaceful breathing was the only sound in the room besides my thundering heartbeat that surely he must be able to hear. "What is it?" I whispered, trying not to wake the sleeping child between us. "You realize he's completely attached to you now, don't you? He talks about you constantly. You're all he wanted to discuss today. I can see that. He's a wonderful kid. So am I." The confession hung in the air between us, heavy with implication and promise. Carter turned to face me fully, carefully moving so as not to disturb Max, and his expression held absolute clarity. No hesitation, no doubt, just pure intention radiating from every feature. "I'm attracted to you, Tyler," he stated plainly, his voice low and serious. "I know how incredibly complicated this is. I'm your boss, which creates a power dynamic that concerns me. I'm older than you, more experienced in ways that might seem intimidating. I have a son who comes with his own set of needs and complications. But despite all of that, despite every logical reason why I should keep my distance, I can't ignore what I'm feeling when I'm around you." My mouth went dry, my tongue feeling thick and useless. I'd suspected something was developing between us, of course, but hearing him say it out loud made it undeniably, terrifyingly real. I wanted to respond, wanted to tell him I felt something too, but fear kept the words trapped inside me like prisoners behind bars. "Carter, you don't have to answer right now. he interrupted gently, his eyes soft with understanding. "I just needed you to know the truth. If this makes you uncomfortable, if you want me to stop, I'll step back immediately. But if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, then I'm asking for a chance, just one opportunity to see where this could go." I looked at him, this powerful, complicated man, who was being so incredibly vulnerable with me, then at Max sleeping peacefully beside us, blissfully unaware of the adult conversation happening around him. This wasn't just about Carter and me exploring attraction. It was about potentially becoming part of something bigger, about taking on responsibility for two people who clearly needed someone stable and caring in their lives. The fear was overwhelming, threatening to choke me, but so was the pull I felt toward both of them. "I need time to think about this," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Carter nodded slowly, and though I saw disappointment flicker across his face like a shadow, he respected my answer without argument. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here waiting however long it takes." Over the following days, Carter gave me exactly what I'd asked for: space to process everything without pressure or expectations. There were no awkward encounters at the office, no forced interactions in hallways or elevators, no loaded glances during meetings. But every evening, without fail, my phone would light up with messages from him. Little updates about Max's day at school, photos of them together doing ordinary father-son activities, sometimes just a simple good night that made my heart ache with a longing I was only beginning to understand. And then one night, sitting alone in my apartment staring at a photo Carter had sent of Max holding up a drawing he'd made specifically for me, something fundamental clicked into place in my mind. I missed them. I missed Carter's rare, genuine smiles and the way he looked at me like I was something infinitely precious and valuable. I missed Max's infectious laughter and the complete trust in his young eyes. Most importantly, I missed feeling like I belonged somewhere with someone, as part of something meaningful. The realization both terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I picked up my phone and typed quickly before I could second-guess myself into paralysis. "I'm ready. For that chance you asked for." Carter's response came almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting by his phone. "I promise I'll make it worth it." Walking into the office the next morning felt surreal, like the entire world had fundamentally shifted overnight, even though nothing visible had actually changed around me. Carter had sent me a message early that morning inviting me to lunch. Not in the crowded cafeteria where curious eyes could watch and whisper and speculate, but in his private office where we could talk freely. When I arrived at the designated time and closed the heavy door behind me, shutting out the rest of the world, he looked up from his desk with a smile that made my stomach flip in ways I was still getting used to. "Nervous?" he asked, a teasing note coloring his voice that I'd never heard him use with anyone else. "A little," I admitted honestly, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. "Don't be. I want you to feel completely comfortable with me, always. That's important to me." We sat at the small conference table in the corner of his expansive office, sharing food he'd ordered from somewhere upscale that I'd never been able to afford on my salary. And we talked, really talked, not about work or obligations or anything related to the company, just about ourselves as people. Carter told me about his childhood growing up under immense pressure, about inheriting his father's company at an age when most people were still figuring out their careers, about the profound loneliness that had become so normal, he'd forgotten what genuine connection felt like until recently. I shared my own story, my middle-class upbringing in a family that worked hard for everything they had, my dreams of making something substantial of myself in the business world. The emptiness I sometimes felt late at night, despite achieving what I thought I wanted professionally. We discovered unexpected commonalities, shared experiences that transcended our different backgrounds, and the conversation flowed with an ease that felt both natural and remarkable. "You're not alone anymore," Carter said softly, reaching across the table to place his hand over mine, his touch warm and grounding. "You have me now, and you have Max, who already considers you few." My eyes stung with unexpected emotion, tears threatening to form despite my best efforts to maintain composure. I'd been on my own for so long, systematically building walls to protect myself from disappointment and hurt, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have people genuinely care about my well-being beyond superficial professional courtesy. Carter and Max had somehow broken through those carefully constructed defenses in just a few short weeks, and the realization was simultaneously beautiful and absolutely terrifying. A week later, Carter extended another invitation, this time formally calling it exactly what it was without any pretense or ambiguity. Family dinner, just the three of us, no interruptions, no distractions. When I arrived at the estate that evening, my anticipation mixed with a nervous excitement I couldn't quite suppress. Max opened the door before I could knock, his entire face lighting up with the kind of pure, unfiltered joy that only children can truly express. "Tyler, you're here. Daddy made special pasta just for you. He's been cooking all afternoon." I looked past him through the open doorway to see Carter standing in the kitchen wearing a dark apron over his casual clothes, a wooden spoon in one hand and a slightly embarrassed expression on his face that made him look endearingly human. The sight was so unexpected, so completely at odds with the intimidating CEO persona he wore at work like armor, that I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "You're actually cooking yourself?" Max insisted I make something special for you instead of ordering takeout. And truthfully, I wanted to. I wanted tonight to be perfect. The evening exceeded every expectation I'd had. We ate dinner together around the large table, Max chattering excitedly about everything that had happened at school that week, while Carter and I exchanged glances filled with unspoken understanding and growing affection. After dinner, we settled into the comfortable living room to watch a movie Max had chosen, though he barely made it halfway through before exhaustion claimed him and his eyes drifted closed. Carter carefully carried him upstairs to bed, and I waited downstairs, my heart racing with anticipation about what would happen when we were finally alone together. When Carter returned and sat beside me on the couch, close enough that our shoulders touched and I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, the moment felt charged with possibility and promise. The fireplace crackled softly in the background, casting dancing shadows across the walls and creating an atmosphere of intimate warmth that wrapped around us like a blanket. "This all feels real," I said quietly, almost afraid that speaking the words aloud might somehow shatter the spell and reveal everything as an elaborate dream. "It is real," Carter replied, his voice equally soft and sincere. "What you've brought into our lives, into my life and Max's life, isn't something temporary or fleeting. I want you to stay, not just for tonight or next week, but permanently. I want you to be part of our family." I turned to look at him directly, searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation or uncertainty, but found only complete certainty reflected in his eyes. "Permanently? You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure about anything. If that's what you want too." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears, could feel the pulse throbbing in my throat. This was a genuine commitment, a promise of something lasting and significant and life-changing. Was I truly ready for this enormous step? Could I really become part of their family, take on the responsibility that came with that role? I thought about Max's complete trust, about the way he'd attached himself to me so thoroughly and how much it would hurt him if I walked away now. I thought about Carter's vulnerability, about how he'd opened himself up despite all his fears and past hurts. And I thought about myself, about the loneliness I'd carried for so long like a weight, and how these two people had somehow filled that void without me even fully realizing it was happening. "I want that," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I want to be part of this family." Carter lifted both hands and gently cradled my face, his touch reverent and infinitely careful, like I was something precious beyond measure. He leaned forward slowly until our foreheads touched, and we stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, existing in the same space, connected in ways that went beyond the physical. "Thank you," he murmured against my skin, "for coming into our lives, for giving us this chance, for being brave enough to say yes." We sat together in comfortable silence as the fire gradually burned lower, our shadows merging on the wall behind us like a visual symbol of what we were becoming. Not three separate individuals, but a cohesive family unit. The word felt foreign and wonderful simultaneously, representing something I'd never thought I'd have, never believed I deserved. Love, I realized with startling clarity, sometimes appears in the most unexpected places and moments. Sometimes it comes in the form of a crying child who runs into your office desperately seeking comfort. Sometimes it comes from a powerful man who courageously lets down his walls and shows you his vulnerable heart. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to accept it despite your fears, it becomes the foundation for something beautiful and lasting and real. Carter and Max were mine now. And I was theirs. Completely, irrevocably, permanently. This was only the beginning of our story together. But it was a beginning I knew I'd treasure forever.